I already know this is dumb. This is the dumb way to do this. This is how you throw your back out. But because of the dumb way that I chose to rig this, this is how we're doing it. All right. And that's how a redneck pulls an engine. Today is an exciting day working on the 12 valve Cummins here in the garage, and we've got some pretty cool parts that are gonna make this swap work. Now that the engine's painted, we need to start installing all of the components and making this block work with the Land Cruiser. So there's a lot of little details in this video. We're gonna go over how to mount all of your accessories. We've gone ahead and painted our oil filter housing and painted the bolts just to give it more contrast. So what we're gonna be doing today is installing a AC alternator relocation bracket. We're going with the one from Adventure Vehicles Northwest or Jonesy's. And we also need to install our injection pump and look at our power steering pump and see if this is going to work for this application. So we have two oil fittings right here. These are going to supply oil to the injection pump, but we're gonna be installing the injection pump, the power steering pump, and all of the AC components, water pump, and all of that. We wanna try and get as much of this done as we can right here. First of all, so you guys can see, it's a lot easier to see when it's outside of the truck. And also, when it is in the truck, it's not fun to be getting down here, bending over, trying to loosen bolts, tighten bolts, torque them down properly. So this is the AC relocation bracket. It's a high mount bracket kit coming from Adventure Vehicles Northwest, and it's made out of billet aluminum. At least these two pieces are. When you go to select your kit, he gives you the option to choose your water outlet size. This is a 1.5 diameter, so the smallest size, because this will work with the Toyota radiator. So we do also need to find a hose that's going to be acceptable to transfer the water into the radiator from the outlet on the Cummins. That's going to be on this housing right here. And it's a pretty cool kit that looks good, and it also gets stuff out of the way and just makes it work. We didn't want to have to try and use the existing bracket with the older AC style. So we have a brand new AC compressor, brand new alternator. Now remember that we use the back off the Denso from the Toyota Land Cruiser so that everything works. It actually just bolts in. We can also look at installing all of our coolant fittings that will use the existing Toyota wiring harness for coolant temps and all that good stuff. We've got a new vacuum pump, a new water pump, a new power steering pump. In order to make this power steering pump work, you do need a little fitting. It's a flare fitting adapter brass insert. I'm not sure exactly what the specs are on that, but that'll go right down in there to make sure that the flared end on the Toyota line can go into this. First, what we need to do though is install our injection pump and set it to top dead center. It's probably a little bit easier to do this in the truck with a barring tool on the bell housing side, but we're just gonna do it here. Double check our work, make sure that we're at top dead center, and then time the pump. We've also got all of our clutch and flywheel components, so those will get installed towards the end. We're gonna just drop the engine in first and then worry about the transmission afterwards. So we wanna get this running, make sure that we didn't set anything to the wrong torque specifications, that there's no leaks, and then we'll install a transmission. So here we go. Here you can see me setting in the gear for the injection pump and then coming in from the back with the input shaft for the injection pump in order to line it up and then start torquing it down. So there's the 3 studs with the nuts, and we've lightly tightened all those down. So there's a timing mark on this side of the pump right here, and it matches up with the case right here, so we know that we're really close. Now we haven't torqued those bolts down quite yet. We will, but those get torqued down to 9 foot-pounds, then 18 foot-pounds. And then we can tighten down our bolt here on the injection pump gear. I found conflicting information on which letter this is supposed to be lined up on. I'm almost positive this is where it should be on the E. You can see that little notch on the camshaft gear. This should be right. I've heard that you can skip a tooth to advance your timing, but you can also adjust your timing by rotating the pump like this. So we're just gonna set it at real close to stock because we don't need much more timing than this. Since this pump was remanufactured, it's timed perfectly and there's a little timing pin in it. So we just need to line everything up and then preliminarily torque our bolts down to make sure that everything's seated and it's not gonna skip a tooth. This is the lock nut or lock bolt for the injection pump, and it kept it timed perfectly. But now that we've inserted it into the gear, we need to loosen it up and then put this tab in there and then retorque everything so it's ready to go. I ordered a support bracket for the vacuum pump since I'll be installing a second gen vacuum pump on this first gen engine, but it ended up not working or lining up with the injection pump bracket, and I ended up having to fabricate out of some angle iron a support bracket that would work with this vacuum pump. This is an area where you have very little space to work with once it's in the truck, so you need to make sure you get this right, hopefully outside of the truck. Now we're moving on to our lift pump installation, and this is a Delphi lift pump, which is a good quality brand, but the return spring on this manual priming device wasn't working as I thought it should. This is the older one. You can hear the diaphragm working when you push the spring down, so I may end up just going with the old one. Here we're installing the water pump. We make sure to have our seal installed flush, and then we torque the two bolts down to 18 foot-pounds. I started to install some of the bracketry for the AC and alternator, but I just didn't like the way it was swinging on the engine stand. So I decided to just pull the Land Cruiser in, see how much space I had to work with, and start pulling stuff off. Someone reached out on Instagram and noted that they were interested in the engine and transmission, so I figured why not just get the engine out since I have to anyways, and then I can recoup some of the cost of the money I'm spending on the swap. This is the second engine I've pulled out of a Land Cruiser, and it really makes me want to get a two-post lift in my own shop at some point, because trying to pull the engine this way is just not fun. But for right now, I'm working with the tools and space that I've got. To prepare for pulling the engine, you need to take off the whole front fascia, including the headlights, the battery tray, radiator, AC condenser, etc. I definitely know that this OEM bumper winch mount that I fabricated is not going to work with the intercooler I end up selecting. There won't be enough room, so we're going to have to figure out something for that. You're going to have a ton of different fluids coming out as you start to disassemble the radiator and transmission components, so have some cardboard underneath the engine if you want to save your concrete. Removing the engine actually really isn't that big of a deal. You're just removing all the superficial components. Here you can see me taking the exhaust off. I've already chopped my exhaust, so that'll come off relatively easily. At this point, I'm removing the drive shafts, the front and rear. We need to take all of our wiring out of the glove box from the ECU and other components. It'll just pull through the firewall right here pretty easily. And then you don't have to worry about taking all the connectors off the individual sensors. All right, well, the engine is out, and I didn't show most of it because there's a lot of going back and forth with trying to rig the hoist and getting the level right on the engine, transmission, and transfer case, which we removed all in one piece. So here's the 1FZ. There's a lifting bracket here and one in the back here. So with the load leveler, it makes it a lot easier to get the angle right by using this device here in order to change your angle. If you're doing this in a shop and you got a two-post lift, that's the best way to do it, really. We removed the transfer case because this is going to be sold this evening, and we're gonna get around $1,000 for that. Transfer case is just placed over here for the time being, and yeah, it's got quite a bit of oil all over it, of course, because we were leaking from the back of our valve cover here. So that's fun. We can't even really put the engine in yet until this gets sold or we put it somewhere because, first of all, of space. Second of all, we need the hoist in order to lift the Cummins into the Land Cruiser. So this is what an engine bay of a Land Cruiser looks like with no engine, of course. What you're gonna have to do is use some sort of jack on the bottom end of the transfer case and just kind of take your time pulling the hoist back out of the engine, being careful not to mess up any of your wiring. We have the wiring harness out of the 1FC as well. This is gonna have to be modified. Basically, we're just gonna be taking a lot of these connectors or these wires off of the main loom that goes back into the engine. You can see there's that rubber boot for the firewall. And then there's the secondary piece of the harness, which plugs into these large detent plugs that go to your transfer case. Some of it goes to your transmission, so we'll be getting rid of that as well. When you're pulling the engine out, you can see how I was up in the engine bay because the angle was just a little too high. I didn't feel comfortable lifting it much higher, the ram. And you need to be careful not to damage this part of your harness on the front clip. So now what we need to do is clean up the whole engine bay. While we're in here and we have the space, we might as well. There's a lot of gunk and dirt and just grime from years of being in here. We are going to keep our ABS. We're not doing a Hydro Boost on this one. We may do it later, but we're gonna keep the original brake booster. We got lucky here because this looks like it's about ready to disintegrate, so we've got a new one, and we're gonna install that when we get all our plumbing for our coolant figured out. This is the rear heater coolant pipe section, and we're gonna take all of that out as well just for clearance, and we don't really need the rear heater. AC lines, we're gonna have to get custom ones made from Dodge to Toyota. There's where the wiring loom will go back in. Got a little bit more wiring, and yeah, we just need to clean this thing up because it is just covered with grime and dirt, as are most 80 series at this age on it. Hub defender clearance is maximized right now because there's no weight on the springs. So next we're going to need to do our steering drop down bracket. We're gonna have to weld that in like we did on the last one. Basically what's gonna happen is the Cummins isn't gonna have enough clearance for the oil pan when we set it in on the motor mounts. So we need to cut here and here, not all the way through on this side, and then bend this down and then weld in our lowering bracket. We also need to space our steering box away from the frame here to the outside so that we have enough room for the timing cover case on the Cummins to fit in there. There's about a 1/4 inch of clearance. A lot of people wonder how much clearance there is with the Cummins engine. There's quite a bit, except for a couple spots, and that's why you need that steering box spacer. The other area is up here on the firewall. It gets tight for sure. I'm debating whether or not to do a body lift. A body lift does make this whole thing a lot easier because of this area here in the tunnel. So we might have to just clearance it and see how it fits. We're going to be putting the engine in first and then doing the transfer case and transmission second. It would probably be easier to just lift this whole engine in with the transmission and transfer case potentially, but then we're getting around, I don't know, 1,200, 1,400 pounds potentially. So that's a lot even for a 2-ton hoist, and I don't want to have all that weight kind of, you know, load leveling and finagling it in there. So we did it that way in the last one. That means we'll have to get a transmission jack on the underside and put the transmission input shaft into the clutch and flywheel assembly, but we'll be good. After you remove the cross member that holds the transfer case up onto the frame, you do need to drop down your sway bar, your front sway bar, so that you have room to get the transfer case, because you're gonna be pulling it at an angle. Unless somebody's found a better way to do it than I have, and there probably is, but again, with limited space and limited tools and lack of sleep and just being tired and mentally exhausted, I kind of just did it the way I did it, and it worked out. Engine's fine, it'll be sold, and it'll be a running engine for whoever buys it. We're gonna need to get into our fuel pump assembly, which will be located under here. We have to pull the carpet up, remove all this stuff out of the way, and then put our stainless steel pickup tube in place of the fuel pump, because we no longer need an electronic fuel pump. But that'll all be coming in the next video. We do need to do the wiring harness as well, so I'm trying to figure out what the best way and time-effective way to do this is. There are just tons and tons of little things that need to be done, and some of it I don't show on camera, some of it I just do for proof of concept, and then we show the finished product. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, or maybe some suggestions. Maybe I'm missing something and you guys can help me out with it. But anytime you do a conversion like this, there's going to be tons of little snags you hit, and you just gotta problem solve and get through them. Talk to people who have done the swap before, and then see if there's any part that makes your life easier, and try and use your time as effectively as possible. So I'm working tons of hours right now, and the little time that I have to work on this, I spend a few hours a day and get a thing or two done a day. So anyways, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.